Palanivel Thiaga Rajan, Minister of Finance and Human Resources Management, Government of Tamil Nadu, to address the gathering.
As per IMF global growth forecast, it was said that the third world countries would be in the brink of recession by next year, as in 2023. But as per the latest report that was published 2 days ago, it is said that due to the growing pressure of inflation, food crisis, war situation and so on, the possibilities of recession from this year is more. Now, do you think that India, as a middle-income developing market economy, would be able to withstand this global crisis? And what are the measures that the government of Tamil Nadu will be taking to stay strong during this crisis, if at all it arises?
See, I think we need to be very careful to distinguish between words like recession, crisis, slow growth, failure. These are all different concepts, right? Crisis implies something. Actually, let me start with recession. The technical definition of recession is that you have 2 quarters in a row in the US. I think in our case, we only look at a year. But you have 2 periods in a row where the total economic activity, or GDP or GSDP in the case of a state of one period, is lower after adjusting for inflation than the year before. That's what a recession technically is. It means you have not grown, you have had negative growth. That's a simple thing in recession. Almost any advanced economy in the world will have recessions every so often, because it's very hard to fine-tune things. You know, you have all these levers: fiscal policy, monetary policy, global market forces, imports, exports, the trade, circumstances, etc. It's almost impossible to have continuous growth without a recession now and then. That's in a true market economy. Of course, if you're an underdeveloped economy, a recession could be interpreted differently. That is to say, if I have a country where the population is growing by 3 or 4%, then unless the economy at least grows by 3 or 4%, at a per capita level, I'm already in recession, right? So the overall pie is one thing. In a country like the US or Europe, or Western Europe, in most of those countries, they are not growing the population that much. So really the gross value itself is enough. So that's a recession. If you look at the history of the US, where I worked for 20 years, so I know the data better, after 1970s, after 1980 or so, no recession has seen the economy shrink by more than 1 or 1.5%, except the global financial crisis in 2008. So a crisis implies something more than a recession. Recessions are routine. You have a slow growth, then you have a good big growth, and then it kind of evens. Crisis implies there's something in the system that is broken, or that needs profound repair or fixing. In that sense, the global financial crisis was a crisis because it broke the banking system. It broke the logic of how interest rates work and how money supply can control or not control outcomes and all that. It was a complete different paradigm. Then you have something like a pandemic, which is 100 times worse, because even in the global financial crisis, it is the lack of the oiled machine running properly that, so recession is the train runs slower than it should. A crisis is that something is wrong and the engine is kind of failing. A pandemic is you have purposely stopped the train, right? You have stopped all demand, you have stopped all supply, you have basically killed all activity. The consequences of that are going to be 10 times worse, because now by definition you've gone to zero activity or close to zero activity. So from that perspective, I would say recessions are not things that we should generally be that worried about, broadly speaking. What we should do is hedge ahead of time, is make sure that we have the tools and the liquidity and the systems in place that were our revenues to drop. Because if I'm a government, what does a recession mean to me? Recession means my tax revenues are going to go down. If my tax revenues go down, I can't run the schemes and platforms that I want for the people. I can't build adequate amount of new roads, or I cannot provide adequate services or supplies or education or whatever. So in the case of Tamil Nadu, it's very clear, because even in a pandemic, we didn't go below zero. We were still at 1 point something. And we are not a fast growing population. So even if I take a per capita basis, it's not really that bad. So my job is much, much easier than the Union Finance Minister's job. My job is that were we to go into a recession, I should have the liquidity, the access to the markets, the cash reserve to work through that period without human beings being affected too badly. And so that work we have already done. Somebody told me the other day that it's very rare that a state finance minister talks about if a recession comes. But given that we have been living a bit in Goldilocks land since 2008, right? Because there's so much excess liquidity pumped out by the banks. Under normal economic theory, if you put out that much excess liquidity, you'll get inflation immediately. But we didn't get any inflation in 2020. Only when the federal governments and the union government, India started pumping money out. Only when fiscal policy became loose did we start to see inflation. And there's a whole debate and a lesson in there that the central banks can no longer control where the money goes. They can print it, but they can't control where it ends up. And there's this old adage that central banks cannot push on a string. You can use a string to pull back the economy by raising rates, but you cannot push on a string to make the economy lift. So rates have a limit. Even quantitative easing has a limit. But once the government start printing, then they really put money into the hands of people who can use it. And therefore, you should expect inflation, because all of a sudden you put more money with the same or equal goods. That's the definition of inflation. You have created inflation. So that inflation is going to be a problem, and it's probably going to end in a recession as the corrective mechanism, because that's what's been happening for a century. A recession is not something we should all be like waving our hands and, shaking our heads about. But in the case of Tamil Nadu, because we have done a bit of planning and because of the discipline we've already shown, we have 2 or 3 hedges. We found a bunch of money we've kept aside. We have reduced our borrowing so that we have excess borrowing capacity. Because a recession doesn't mean the money goes away, right? A recession means growth goes down, but the people with the money still have the money. So I can still go to the bond markets and issue. So we have kept a bunch of borrowing capacity. We have a bunch of assets that we can liquidate if we have to. We have some liquidity we found. So on Wednesday, I said in the assembly, I made a commitment. I said, if we don't go into a global recession, then every year the government of Tamil Nadu, the percentage of our GDP that we get into the hands of the people, I'm not talking about total spending, I'm talking about what I addressed earlier, whether we can actually reach it to the people and not lose it in the pipeline or to the middlemen or to the intermediaries. I said we will improve our efficiency every year so that the percentage of GSDP that will get into the hands of the people will go up every year. At the same time, we will make our deficit as a percentage of GSDP come down every year. That means through proper management of revenues, resources, closing leakages, closing the pipeline breaking, we will get it right. But if we were to go into a recession, we will be better situated than most states, and certainly better than the union government, which has a much more difficult job and which has much less cushion than us. And so we will be able to overcome that period of recession. Because recession is not a crisis, it's not a pandemic, it's just a recession. We can overcome the recession better than most people, and we've already got the plans in place for that.
My question, higher education institution focus more on placement, especially in corporate companies. What are the initiatives by the government to steer college students towards entrepreneurship also? And also the second question, sir. Now the supply of the 2,000 rupees or less, so there is again demonetization is going to happen.
I don't know, I don't think I should touch the second question, right? I think it would be ridiculous. I think in the history of the world, it's hard for me to point to a more devastating, self-inflicted economic tragedy than the first demonetization. Whether it was the right thing to do and all, I'm not going to get into. Actually, let me take a bit of an aside here. We have all these debates. I'm right-wing, you're left-wing, I'm secular, you're Hindutva, you're minority appeasing, all this label, all this kind of name-calling. All of it at some level you should treat as noise, right? Including me. If I deliver results, then you say, What was the philosophy? Did you follow that philosophy, and did that execution deliver results? If I don't deliver results, it doesn't matter what all my philosophy was. I've still not delivered the result. So, unless you have outcomes, there's no point having arguments with people, oh, it was a good idea, it could have done this, it would have done that. I just asked a few profound questions. I said, is there any example in the history of the world where you demonetized 86% of the country without having the new notes already printed? Forget the new notes already printed. Without having purchased enough ink to print the new notes and enough paper stock. Right? It's like lunacy. Right? So there are profound. So demonetization la இன்னொரு தடவை பேசினா அவ்வளோதான். ஏற்கனவே 7 வருஷம் இருக்கிற நஷ்டம் இன்னுமே our fate will be sealed. Right? I don't even want to get into that debate. I don't think anybody is that crazy. The issue about getting people into entrepreneurship, why would somebody decide to do their own business instead of going to take a job? A job gives you safety, security, promotion, health insurance, career prospects, etc. அதையெல்லாம் விட்டுட்டு நீங்கள் சொந்த தொழில் திறக்கணும்னா then the environment must encourage you to do that. It must be easy to do business. You must have access to capital. You must have some mentorship, some incubator, some infrastructure that allows even a young person to be able to make that leap. So I think from an entrepreneurship perspective, we need to do a lot more. Some of it is about money and incubators and mentors and all that, but a lot of it is about the way the government functions. We need to make it easy for people to start businesses and not be bothered by rent seeking or other red tape from the government. It's hard to do because the culture is not that great, but we're trying to do that. But there's also a last slice of that which I would point out, is that in places like the US, it is considered valuable to have tried and failed. நீங்கள் ஏதோ ஒரு தொழில் ஆரம்பித்து அது திவாலானாவோ இல்லை அது நீங்கள் கடமைப்பட்டு இல்லை தேவைப்பட்டு மூடிட்டிங்கன்னா it's not considered a bad thing. It's considered that you have accreted some experience, some skill set, some learning from that. Failed entrepreneurs are many and they're not considered like dropouts or failures. In our culture, failing at something is considered a bad thing. And I always cite this example. I think when Microsoft was in those exponential growth years, maybe in the 90s, 2000s, just before Bill Gates left, he once gave an interview when he said, I want to recruit managers and senior executives from failed enterprises. Because he says, if you look at the people who only ever worked at Microsoft, they've only ever known success. Managing through success is not a big deal. Vandi ஓடிட்டு இருக்கு. இதை நான் சரியான திசையில் கொண்டு போகிறது is not that complicated a thing. So he says at Microsoft we only have people who've known success and we don't know if they really can withstand a crisis or withstand a shock or withstand a bad outcome. And so he valued people enough that he said, I want to go and get people from failed startups, from failed organizations, and they will bring a skill set and an attitude that those who have only known success will not. So I think that also we need to change our mindset a little bit, that trying and failing is not a bad outcome. And that if you fail once doesn't mean you'll fail forever. Sometimes, you only know your limits when you try and fail. So, at a personal level, I give you this example. When I came to run for the election in 2016, I was told that unless you pay for votes, you lose. Right? Because the culture is like that. I said, no, I came because of a sense of obligation. As I said when I started, I didn't have any real career ambitions or anything. My father was like this, my grandfather was like that, my great-grandfather was like that. So therefore, I want to also serve. I came. And they said, if you don't pay, you lose. I said, if I lose, I lose. If I win, I want to win my way. If I lose, man can't win at everything. I'll lose this and I'll do something else. It's not the end of the world. So I chose to go without paying. By the actual outcome, I won by like 4% margin. I won with like 6,000 or 5,860 votes or something. I go to the MLA go to the assembly. 5 years later, the second election comes. This time they tell me, no, that time was like lightning striking once. It won't strike twice. This time you better pay. So I said, no, I feel like I've proven that you can win without, no, that was before you were anybody, now you've been MLA, this, that. So again I said the same thing. I said, listen, if I lose, I lose. There's no, like losing is not the end of the world. Just like a recession is not the equivalent of a pandemic. Losing one election, my life will be okay. I got other things going for me. And the capacity to accept failure, I think, is one of the great strengths in life, right? So again, I said I won't pay. And of course, this time I won by 34,000 something votes. Now I'm starting to set a pattern that it's possible to be a good MLA, that it's possible to have good connect with the people, that it's possible to get elected and re-elected without paying. But it only came because I was willing to accept defeat. I was willing to accept failure in the short-term failure, right? And in fact, on my way here, I was just texting with my friend who I said has just become a lord yesterday. And the UK politics is in huge turmoil, right? The 44-day Prime Minister has resigned and they are searching. And the actual text I sent him, I said, the great luxury of people like us, our lives can withstand this kind of volatility and can withstand almost any outcome. So it falls where it falls. I hope you get what you want. But if you don't, it's okay. You lose this one, you'll win something else, or you'll do something else, right? The great luxury we have built in life is the capacity to withstand volatility or withstand failure. That is something you should think about a lot.
What are some things do you miss after becoming a politician that you maybe enjoyed earlier?
It's a very dangerous question. I think the thing I miss the most is the absence of the spotlight. I miss being by myself. Wherever I am, I have to be so careful what I say, who I see, what I do. There's no privacy anymore. I can't just, I don't get too much time to myself and I don't get space. And I think, I knew that going in. I was born in a political family, so most people don't realize that till it's too late. I knew that cost was coming before I went into it, so again, I can't complain. But I would say the lack of, especially for a guy like me, because I was independently well off, I didn't need the money, I had access to everything. So the inability to have a normal life is probably what I miss the most. And I was just saying to the principal earlier that in the 4 or 5 years in my last banking job, there was never more than 5 days, I think 2 times more than 5 days I was in one country. Otherwise I was traveling, I was global head. I managed a bunch of businesses around the world. I was constantly on the road. And now I don't go anywhere, right? It's, if I'm not around to sign files for 1 week, the chief secretary and the chief minister start getting agitated. Say, where's the finance minister? Call him. So I don't have the luxury of taking holidays or going out of the country or something as often as I used to. But in the scheme of life, these are not great sacrifices. They are minor, changes in lifestyle relative to the great gift I have of being able to make a difference and make changes and fix things for a lot of people.
Sir, you are very active in social media. So how Twitter acts as a space for you to communicate to people?
I don't know. I'd like to walk further back, but then you'd have to turn your head around. So I'm going to stay only in the front here. But I think social media has many pluses and minuses. I think in a place like Tamil Nadu, the pluses probably outweigh the minuses because most people are well educated. And I think we have one of the highest penetrations of internet. And Twitter is a little microcosm of a world, right? I think, 5% or 8% or 10% of the population is on Twitter. So it's like, what do you say? If you really get worked up about it, you're getting worked up about very little. But it's a good medium for communication. It can be easily misused. Something about impersonal interaction. That means when I write on Twitter, if I write to your handle, I don't know who you are, I don't know your background, I don't know anything. somehow it seems to bring out relatively, what can I say, uncivilized behavior. You know, things that you and I would never dream of saying to each other in our face to face. People feel comfortable saying on Twitter. Sometimes I'm a bit aggressive on Twitter also. But the difference is that I'm a bit aggressive in real life. So I don't change because I'm on Twitter or not. But many people change because they're on Twitter. They say things they wouldn't say in real life. So I think it's mixed. I don't know. I think there was a documentary on Netflix, right? I don't know how many of you saw it. It was called The Social Dilemma or something. What is it called? The Social Network. Have any of you seen that documentary? That was so telling. What I thought was the most telling part of that documentary, where they interviewed all these senior executives of Facebook and Pinterest and Twitter and LinkedIn and all of these companies. Not a single person had his own children or her own children on any of these networks, right? So the people who create, who own, who get rich off these networks, keep it far away from their own children. That should give you some indication of the risk it poses, right?
So what do you think of gig economy, and would you think India would adopt a gig economy? What are the pros and cons of gig economy if it settles in India?
I mean, listen, India is the original home of the gig economy, right? What is the gig economy? It means that you don't have a permanent job, you don't have benefits, you don't have a pension, you don't have insurance. I mean, the entire informal economy is effectively the gig economy. I think, you know, the benefits of the gig economy can be overblown a bit, particularly in a place like India. What we need to do is create more formal employment. We need people who are covered by a safety net, who have health insurance, who have some kind of pension plan. Right now, the overwhelming majority of people who have those benefits are government employees. And that's why there's this natural skew away from the market and into public government employment. I'm not sure that it changes anything dramatically. I think if anything, we need a lot more formal employment. I'm not sure that there is any bar to a gig economy right now, right? And like the labor laws are not that restrictive. I think there was a study, many of you may have seen, in the pandemic, a lot of IT company employees were parallelly working for multiple companies without anybody realizing, right? So clearly the gig economy is upon us, whether we realize it or not.
In what way the non-Mudalvan scheme is different from vocationalization with the Kothari Commission proposed in 1964? And we know the status of vocationalization in Tamil Nadu as well as in India. The intervention strategies were not so good, so it did not reach to the stakeholders. This is my first question. So, in non-Mudalvan scheme, if it is going to be different or if it's going to be the same, whatever it is, what are the intervention strategies that government of Tamil Nadu has planned?
I must confess, I don't know what the Kothari Commission was. I don't know what it said. So I can't do the comparison. Actually, I thought you were going to say that we're winding up the session. I didn't realize you actually had a question. But anyway, I think the non-Mudalvan scheme is about building an attitude that says, whatever I do, I want to be the best at what I do. Some part of that is awareness. You know, certainly some part of that is vocational guidance, career guidance at the government schools to the students and their parents. These are the kinds of careers that exist. You don't all have to be engineers and doctors and lawyers. You can be a very successful chef or a visual artist or a graphic designer or a music composer. You know, just exposing them to the range of careers that exist in the world today and the way you can get compensated for those and the progression and so forth. So I would say it starts with that kind of career counseling to the parents and students. And why the parents is very important, because we exponentially increase the number of people coming into the system. So the parents are not in a position to advise the children. They don't know. So they need somebody to help them. And it goes through, you know, making sure that students get the right kind of training the first time in high school, in colleges, etc., to further shape the curriculum. And then to have reskilling as something else. But above it all, to bring a professionalism and an approach, that's the name, non-mudal means in whatever I do, I am the best at what I do, to bring that perspective, right? I tell my own children, I said, when I do a job, I want somebody to come and look at it and say, oh, almost nobody could have done it better. Ah, that must be Thiaga. Nobody else would have done that way. That kind of pride in work, that attitude I think we want to bring is the overarching theme where all these other things fit in. I'm not sure exactly what the Kothari Commission was, so I apologize, I won't do the comparison.